My name is Dolores Hayes, and I'm 20 years old. I grew up in an ordinary American family right in the heart of Brooklyn. My father, Humbert Hayes, was a successful businessman, while my mother, Charlotte, dedicated herself to caring for our family as a full-time homemaker. On the outside, we looked like the perfect family, but beneath the surface, there were tensions I hadn't even realized existed until recently. This past summer, everything changed. It was a sweltering July morning, with the sun beating down relentlessly, making the air inside the house feel heavy and stagnant. I was in my room, as usual, lost in my drawings. Art was my escape, my way of expressing thoughts and emotions I didn't know how to say out loud. I was fully immersed when I suddenly heard my mother calling me downstairs. "Dolores, come down, please. I need help with lunch. Your father brought a friend." Her voice held a subtle tension, and right away, I knew she wasn't pleased about this unexpected guest. Sighing, I put down my pencils and glanced in the mirror. My long black hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, and I was wearing an old t-shirt and shorts. Hardly an outfit for entertaining, but I wasn't expecting anything special from this visitor anyway. As I descended the stairs, I heard laughter and deep voices from the living room. Entering the kitchen, I found my mother stirring a pot of soup with unusual intensity, her face drawn. "Mom, are you okay?" I asked, moving closer. "Yes, honey, just a little tired," she replied, attempting a small smile. "Help me set the table. Your father's trying to impress his new friend." I began setting out plates and cutlery, my ears picking up snippets of conversation from the living room. My father's voice was enthusiastic, and I could tell he was showing off his business achievements. "Quilty, you need to learn these tricks if you want to get ahead in this field," he said, his voice dripping with pride. Then came a response, deep and smooth, with a hint of an accent I couldn't quite place. "Thanks for the advice, Humbert. With your guidance, I'm sure I'll be making deals as well as you do before long." The new voice piqued my curiosity. Peeking into the living room, I finally saw him, Quilty. He sat across from my father, and he was the most attractive man I'd ever seen. Tall, with an athletic build and dark hair, and a bit of stubble that gave him an effortlessly casual look. But it was his eyes that caught me the most, bright green, almost glowing. Our eyes met, and an electric wave seemed to run through me. He flashed me a crooked smile that made my heart race. Embarrassed, I hurried back into the kitchen, trying to compose myself. "Did you finish setting the table?" my mom asked, snapping me out of my daze. "Almost," I replied, struggling to hide my excitement. "Mom, who is that man with Dad?" She frowned slightly. "His name is Quilty. He's a new employee at your father's company, from Chicago. Your father has taken him under his wing." Okay, was all I managed, but my mind kept drifting back to Quilty's piercing green eyes. Dinner that evening had a tense undercurrent. My father and Quilty took over the conversation, discussing business strategies and sharing stories from work. My mother mostly stayed quiet, focusing on serving the food with a forced smile. I kept sneaking glances at Quilty, and every time our eyes met, my stomach did a little flip. There was something in his gaze that made me feel both vulnerable and excited. After dinner, while I was clearing the table, I overheard my father inviting Quilty to stay for a drink. My heart leaped at the idea of having him around a little longer. "Dolores," my father called out, "why don't you show Quilty your drawings? I'm sure he'd be interested." I felt my cheeks heat up. My drawings were deeply personal, something I'd never shown to anyone outside of my family. But the chance to be alone with Quilty was too tempting to pass up. "Sure, Dad," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. Quilty followed me up to my room, and as we stepped inside, I suddenly became self-conscious about the mess. Pencils and papers were scattered everywhere, and clothes were tossed on my bed. I felt a little embarrassed, but Quilty didn't seem to mind at all. Quilty's eyes scanned my room, taking in the drawings plastered across my walls. "Wow, Dolores," he said, his voice laced with admiration. "You have an incredible talent." His words, so close, sent a shiver down my spine. "Thank you," I murmured, barely daring to look his way. He moved closer to one of my favorite pieces, a charcoal portrait of a young woman with a somber, distant gaze. "This one is especially beautiful," he remarked. "Is it a self-portrait?" I shook my head, almost shyly. "No, just someone from my imagination." 𝐤𝐤𝐤 turned to face me, his green eyes locking onto mine. "She looks a lot like you," he said quietly, with that same intensity in her gaze. I was at a loss for words, and suddenly, the space between us felt charged with something unspoken. He stepped toward me, and without thinking, I backed up until I felt the cool wall pressing against my back. 𝐤𝐤𝐤 lifted his hand, resting it gently against the wall beside my head, his presence overwhelming yet careful, never crossing the line. "You're a very special girl, Dolores," he whispered, his breath tinged with the mint and wine from dinner. "I wonder if you even know how beautiful you are." My heart hammered in my chest, so loud I was sure he could hear it. I wanted to respond, to say anything at all, but the words just wouldn't come. 𝐤𝐤𝐤 leaned in, so close that I could see every detail of his face, count each lash. Then, just as his gaze lingered on mine, my mother's voice broke through from the hallway. "Dolores, where are the dessert plates?" 𝐤𝐤𝐤 pulled back quickly, as if he hadn't just cornered me against the wall, giving me one last intense look before stepping toward the door. "Thanks for showing me your drawings, Dolores," he said, voice steady, as though nothing had happened. "They're really impressive." I stood there, my hands trembling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had it been real, or was it all just some wild fantasy? All I knew for sure was that 𝐤𝐤𝐤 had awakened something within me, a surge of feelings I'd never experienced before. The days that followed were restless. I couldn't get 𝐤𝐤𝐤 out of my mind. His striking green eyes and that rich, warm voice kept haunting my thoughts. I tried to concentrate on my studies and daily routines, but my mind always found its way back to him. Each time I picked up a pencil to draw, my hand would instinctively begin sketching his features. I found myself drawing his face, his smile, his intense gaze, each drawing more detailed than the last, as if I could capture the essence of him on paper. Inside, I felt torn. I knew my feelings were entirely inappropriate, yet the pull I felt toward him was undeniable. One evening, just as I was finishing a new sketch of him, I overheard my father mentioning to my mother that 𝐤𝐤𝐤 would be visiting again soon. My heart skipped a beat, a surge of excitement mixed with dread. I had no idea how I'd handle seeing him again. That evening, when 𝐤𝐤𝐤 arrived at our doorstep, the atmosphere at home grew even heavier with tension. My father was clearly delighted to have him over, eager to share every work story and success. My mother, as always, stayed in the background, preparing dinner in silence, her forced smile betraying her discomfort. As for me, I tried to avoid meeting 𝐤𝐤𝐤's gaze, worried that my emotions might be written all over my face. But it was impossible to ignore his presence. Each time our eyes met, even for the briefest moment, my heart pounded wildly. After dinner, while 𝐤𝐤𝐤 and my father continued discussing business, I retreated to my room, hoping to steady myself. But thoughts of him wouldn't leave me alone. His voice, his face, the memory of his closeness all swirled in my mind. Suddenly, a soft knock interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called, expecting to see my mom or dad. Instead, 𝐤𝐤𝐤 stepped in, his expression thoughtful, almost serious. "Hi, Dolores. I wanted to talk to you," he said, closing the door quietly behind him. I swallowed, feeling a wave of anticipation and uncertainty. "About what?" "Your drawings," he replied, moving closer to my desk, his eyes roaming over my sketches. "You're really talented, you know that?" "Thank you," I whispered, barely managing to keep my voice steady. For a few moments, he silently studied my work, and the air in the room grew heavy, thick with an unspoken tension. Then he pulled up the chair beside me, sitting so close I could feel the warmth radiating from him. The quiet between us was charged, that same electric pull I'd felt before coming to life once more. "Do you really think I'm talented?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going, hoping to distract myself from the storm of emotions building inside me. "Absolutely," he replied, locking his gaze with mine. "You're very special, Dolores." I could feel my cheeks warm as his words sank in, stirring up a complicated mix of joy and anxiety in me, all tangled together in one intense moment. In the weeks that followed, my connection with 𝐤𝐤𝐤 only grew deeper. We exchanged countless messages, sharing our thoughts, experiences, and little pieces of ourselves. Each time I heard from him, my heart beat a little faster. Our conversations weren't openly romantic, but beneath every word, there was a feeling I couldn't ignore. Every time he visited, our exchanges were filled with easy laughter, smiles, and unspoken understanding. We talked about everything: his life in Chicago, his dream of starting his own business, and the obstacles he'd faced to get to where he was. And in turn, I opened up about my hopes for the future, my love for art, and my dream of one day becoming a recognized artist. When 𝐤𝐤𝐤 came over again, I was eager to show him my latest drawing. We were in my room, going over some of my recent work. Without thinking much of it, I picked up a sketch and, wanting to give him a better view, sat on his lap to explain the details. 𝐤𝐤𝐤 looked a little flustered but didn't pull away. "Look, I finished this one just yesterday," I said, pointing out the highlights and shadows. "What do you think?" 𝐤𝐤𝐤 studied the drawing and then looked at me, his eyes holding that familiar blend of intensity and warmth. "It's incredible, Dolores. You really are talented," he said, though I noticed a slight strain in his voice. I could feel his hands tense slightly beneath me. Teasing him a little, I leaned in close, breathing softly near his ear. "Thank you, 𝐤𝐤𝐤," I whispered. "You don't know how much your support means to me." His breathing quickened, and I could sense he was struggling to keep his composure. In that moment, a line was crossed. The unspoken feelings between us finally surfaced. We sat there in silence for a while, just feeling the closeness, the quiet charged with emotions neither of us dared to put into words. I knew this was wrong, that letting my heart lead me down this path could end badly, but the pull I felt toward 𝐤𝐤𝐤 was too powerful to resist. After a few minutes, he gently lifted me from his lap and stood, his expression conflicted. "Dolores, this isn't right," he murmured, avoiding my gaze. "I can't let this go any further." He was right, of course. We both knew this was a line we shouldn't cross, yet the strength of our feelings made it nearly impossible to walk away. In the days that followed, 𝐤𝐤𝐤 and I continued to message each other, but our conversations felt more guarded. I tried to focus on my drawings and studies, but thoughts of him still lingered, filling my mind when I least expected it. One afternoon, while lost in thought about him, something surprising happened. My mom and I were cleaning out the attic, sorting through boxes of things that hadn't seen the light of day in years. Amidst the dusty books, old clothes, and forgotten toys, I stumbled upon a box filled with old photographs. I started flipping through them, enjoying the faded snapshots of past family moments. But then, one picture stopped me cold. In the photo was a young woman who looked remarkably like my mom, holding close a man I'd never seen before. "Mom," I called, holding the photo up. "Who is this?" She turned, and the moment her eyes fell on the picture, her face paled. She took it from my hands, gazing at it with an expression I'd never seen, her eyes glistening with tears as she let out a heavy sigh. "Dolores, we need to talk," she said, settling down on an old sofa in the corner of the attic. I sat beside her, my mind racing with questions, not knowing what to expect. "This man," she began softly, "is Ryan. He was my first love. I met him a long time before I met your father." Stunned, I listened as she began telling her story. She explained how deeply she and Ryan had loved each other, but their relationship had been far from easy. Ryan had been a musician, full of passion and creativity, but he was also troubled. He struggled with addiction, and though he'd promised countless times to change, he couldn't pull himself away from that destructive path. My grandparents had strongly opposed the relationship, and, in the end, she'd been forced to make a painful choice. As she talked, I realized there was a whole side of my mother I'd never known, a side that had experienced love and heartbreak long before her life with my father. She recounted how, soon after breaking things off with Ryan, she'd met my father. My mom told me that after breaking things off with Ryan, she found comfort and stability with my father, and that, soon after, she discovered she was pregnant. They decided to marry, and although my father knew she had loved someone before him, he never knew the full story. I never told him about Ryan, she admitted, her voice soft. I didn't tell him how much that relationship shaped me. Hearing this, I was stunned. I'd always seen my mom as calm, practical, and entirely devoted to our family. Now, I understood that she was also a woman who had faced difficult choices and carried heavy memories. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked, my voice catching. She sighed. "I wanted to protect you, Dolores. But I see now that it was a mistake. You have the right to know our family story." We stayed there for a long time, talking about her past, secrets she'd kept for years. I realized that our seemingly perfect family had its own history of love and heartbreak. That evening, lying in bed, I couldn't stop wondering what other hidden stories might be tucked away in my family's past. It was clear to me now that no family is truly perfect, and yet, despite everything, ours remained strong and close. The weeks that followed brought my mom and me closer, as we sometimes revisited these deep conversations. I felt I understood her in a way I hadn't before. Meanwhile, my connection with 𝐤𝐤𝐤 became increasingly complicated. Our exchanges still felt magnetic, and every interaction seemed to carry a deeper, unspoken significance. "Why don't you stay?" my father suggested. 𝐤𝐤𝐤 agreed, and my heart started to beat faster. The prospect of him staying overnight in our house filled me with mixed feelings, excitement, and a touch of fear. Late at night, when everyone had gone to bed, I lay in my room, unable to sleep. Thoughts of 𝐤𝐤𝐤 wouldn't leave me alone. Suddenly, I heard quiet footsteps approaching my door. Lying with my back to the door, I didn't see who entered, but I felt someone gently remove the blanket from my bed and lie down behind me, pressing close. My heart froze with surprise. Thoughts of 𝐤𝐤𝐤 kept me awake. Suddenly, I heard soft footsteps outside the door. I was lying with my back to the door and couldn't see who came in, but I knew who it was. He gently took the blanket off my bed and lay down behind me, snuggling up. My heart sank in surprise. His hands roamed over my hips, neck, and melons. They were gentle but determined. My panties became wet. I felt him start to take them off. I had no doubt it was 𝐤𝐤𝐤. Everything inside me turned upside down. 𝐤𝐤𝐤 hugged me tightly and I couldn't move. We did it in silence so that no one could hear us. We were drowning in the pleasure of the embrace. I felt his big tool. I helped to put it inside. I had to cover my mouth as we were silent, feeling each other, and it was an expression of our feelings and desires that we had hidden for so long after several hours of passion and silence. 𝐤𝐤𝐤 quietly got out of bed. He dressed carefully and looked at me. "I need to go back to the guest room so as not to arouse suspicion," he whispered, leaning down to kiss my forehead. I nodded, feeling a mixture of disappointment and understanding. 𝐤𝐤𝐤 quietly left my room, leaving the door slightly ajar. In the dark, my heart continued to beat faster from everything that had happened. The next morning, waking up alone, I realized that this night had changed a lot. Our relationship had deepened in a way that would be difficult to ignore, though I knew it could lead to complications. The next morning, waking up alone, I knew something had changed. Our connection had deepened in a way that neither of us could ignore. I also understood that this would likely be our last night together, as I would be leaving soon for university in another city. The thought brought a bittersweet ache, but I knew I needed to follow my own path forward. Saying goodbye to my home and family was harder than I'd expected. I was heading off to study at a prestigious university known for its incredible art program, a dream I'd nurtured for so long. My heart swelled with both excitement and uncertainty as I stepped into this new chapter. The first few weeks flew by in a blur of lectures, new faces, and assignments. My world seemed to grow each day, and every experience brought fresh insight. One of my favorite classes quickly became art history. I was eager to dive into the past, exploring the lives and works of the great artists who'd inspired me. During our first art history exam, I had the chance to meet Professor Humbert Johnson. He was young, enthusiastic, and spoke about art with a passion that captivated the room. The exam was challenging, but I felt prepared, having spent hours absorbed in the material. After the test, while most of the students filed out, I stayed behind, wanting to ask Professor Johnson a few questions about the day's topics. Approaching his desk, I felt a slight nervousness. "Professor Johnson, may I ask you a couple of questions about the material?" I ventured, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course, Dolores," he replied with a welcoming smile. "What would you like to know?" As we discussed the exam content, I couldn't help but notice the way his eyes lit up with every answer, his enthusiasm contagious. When Professor Johnson spoke about art, his enthusiasm was contagious, and I felt a spark of connection form between us. Over the next few weeks, I often lingered after class, eager to discuss our favorite topics. Soon, we weren't just talking about art. We shared dreams, life stories, and aspirations. These conversations became a steady source of inspiration and support for me. As time went on, our relationship grew beyond the walls of the classroom. Humbert, as I began to call him, wasn't only a gifted teacher, he was a warm, kind person who genuinely cared about those around him. His honesty and openness made me feel that I could trust him with my deepest thoughts and hopes. Humbert became not only a mentor, but also a friend, someone I felt truly comfortable around. With his support, I found the confidence to tackle challenges, and I sensed that with him by my side, my dreams felt closer than ever. Gradually, our relationship deepened. With each day, I grew more certain that I had found someone with whom I could be completely open, someone who saw me for who I truly was. Several months later, as our connection blossomed, we realized that what we shared wasn't simply admiration or friendship, it was love, true and unmistakable. This understanding brought us even closer, and soon, Humbert proposed. Without hesitation, I joyfully accepted. Our family and friends were overjoyed. We planned a small, intimate wedding held in my parents' garden, surrounded by our closest loved ones. My mother helped me find the perfect dress, and on the day, my father, hiding his tears, walked me down the aisle. Humbert stood waiting beneath a flowered arch, his eyes bright with happiness. As we exchanged vows, I felt this moment was the start of an incredible new chapter in our lives. Afterward, we celebrated under the stars with homemade food, music, and dancing. It felt like a dream, a perfect beginning to our life together. Married life with Humbert turned out to be even more wonderful than I had imagined. We supported each other through everything, sharing our joys and our setbacks, and each day seemed to bring a new discovery. We had shared interests, but also our own pursuits, which made our lives together rich and fulfilling. Humbert continued teaching, beloved by his students, while I poured my heart into my art. Soon, my work began catching the attention of galleries, and I received an invitation for my first solo exhibition. Seeing people admire my paintings, watching as they found meaning in each piece, it was a feeling beyond words. Humbert was always there for me, helping me believe in myself, offering encouragement whenever I faced a challenge. Thanks to his unwavering support, I grew as an artist, finding success in a field I had only dreamed of. As my art began to sell and my career flourished, Humbert and I bought a cozy house with a large, bright studio where I could create freely. Our home was filled with laughter, love, and a warmth that drew friends and family to us often. Hosting dinners and gatherings became a tradition, and every shared moment seemed to deepen our bonds with those around us. Life wasn't without its challenges, of course. We faced difficulties like any family, but we always leaned on each other to get through. Each obstacle only strengthened our love and resilience. Time went on, and my work started being exhibited not only across the country, but also internationally. I traveled to new cities and countries, meeting people and finding inspiration in unfamiliar places. Yet, no matter where my art took me, I always knew Humbert was there, waiting for me at home, my anchor, my partner, and the love of my life.